going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Bodacious Rant with Burn and Rye. Man, I hope everybody's been doing great. Hope everybody had a good Easter this year, and that April's going swimmingly for all of you. Looking into next month's movies, which I'm not going to talk too much about or list them all off. May is going to be a very horror-driven month, and what way to kind of start feeding into it is getting some horror movies in. This was one where I just had no real expectations when I first saw the trailer, even with the director and the creative team attached to it. I just thought, is this really it? So if you guys haven't guessed already or you're not sure what we're talking about, we are talking about Lee Cronin, the director of Evil Dead Rise from already 3 years ago, which is crazy. We were talking about Lee Cronin's The Mummy, which is like the third biggest remake in like the last 30 years. This is a spoiler-free review, so we're not going to get super into it or anything to ruin it for you guys. So if whoever does want to see this still, you can check it out in theaters. But as always, if you did happen to like the video, like me and Bert's opinions, or you like the movie, feel free to give us that thumbs up to show your support. Ring the bell, ding, ding, ding for notifications, and of course subscribe just to join our ranting, army or our group, whatever we are. I should get pins for everybody, so when we all go to conventions and stuff, people will be like, hey, where are you with? It's like the Bodacious Rant. What do you want? Anyways, so I haven't seen the original Mummy in a long time, so I don't really remember it from 1932, which is one of those classic movie monsters. But I think, like Burn, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but our generation, we grew up with Brendan Fraser's The Mummy from 1999, which is still, those first two movies are still beloved by most people you talk to. And then almost 10 years ago already, we had The Mummy starring Tom Cruise and Sofia Boutella. And that one was just a giant misfire, no disrespect to the actors or the team and stuff, but it just wasn't it. It tried to go way bigger and more than Brendan Fraser's, and that's where it flopped hard. This one is a little bit more of a personable story, like more tries to tug at the heartstrings a little bit, in which a family that was living in Cairo, their daughter disappears out of nowhere. Like, she just gets kidnapped, and for 8 years the family is just living until they get the call that your daughter's been found. But the catch is she was found in a sarcophagus, and they bring her home, but that's when things are definitely not what they seem, trying to rehabilitate their daughter while noticing some really dark and messed up things. And like I said, Lee Cronin directed Evil Dead Rise from a few years ago, and for any of those people who've seen Evil Dead franchise, especially the ones within the last 12 years or so, this is definitely one of those things, like, it could either really work for you or it's going to be a really big miss. And, before I get into my opinions, I've been talking a lot already, Burn, did you have any expectations given this? Because I don't remember if you... I think we both like Evil Dead Rise. I just forgot what your thoughts are on that kind of stuff. And what did you think about this one in general?
I mean, I think because of how much I really enjoyed Evil Dead Rise, I had a little bit of anticipation for this movie, because I thought Lee Cronin did a really good job with that movie in sort of taking something that people were already familiar with the Evil Dead franchise, and putting his own sort of spin on it. It definitely had those elements of the super gnarly, gory aspects of Evil Dead that people have come to love, and it also kept the spirit of that dark humor element. And I thought told a really good personal story too at the heart of it, with that family and all the really good job that all the actors did working off of each other in that movie. So that movie was a huge surprise to me, and I really enjoyed that one. Was one of my favorite horror movies the year it came out. So I was always going to be interested in seeing what Lee Cronin did next. And when they said that he was going to be doing his own version of a reboot of The Mummy, I thought that could have been pretty interesting. Just because of how much I really liked Evil Dead Rise. So and then we got the trailer for it, and then it was like, okay, this is definitely not sort of leaning into what you mentioned in the Stephen Sommers, Brandon Fraser version of it. This very much feels like it's going to be its own horror, really leaning into the horror take of The Mummy. And what we got was If it felt more like Evil Dead Rise, then I would say it felt like a mummy movie. You know, just because, like you, I haven't seen the original one in a very long time. But when you think of of a horror movie called The Mummy, you think of like this sort of like, like this ancient evil, right? This like a sort of like very like Egyptian themed. You feel like it's gonna take sort of like those elements of like things that we know from like Egyptian mythology and stuff like that. And while there's sprinkles of that here, it's does this movie does end up feeling more like your by the book possession movie, and that was just something that I just couldn't really get over as the movie kept going along. Definitely has a lot of those elements from Evil Dead Rise, in particular the very in your face gnarly goriness of it. So if you did like that element from that movie, you might enjoy this one here because this definitely is of that vein. But where I think this movie sort of is a little bit of a step back for Lee Cronin, from Evil Dead Rise to this movie, is I think that movie had a little bit more of a better balance of, juxtaposing that really like, again, the really like gruesome moments, and giving you sort of like a lighthearted, not necessarily not like super funny, but like a dark comedy element to it, to sort of like, balance things out, where this movie feels like it doesn't do that, and just by nature of it, this one feels a little bit meaner, a little bit like more mean spirited in that sense, where these things are happening to this family, and it just doesn't feel right. Like it's hard to enjoy seeing like these bad things happen, just because there isn't that sort of like counterweight to sort of to sort of make things a little bit easier to swallow. So that was that. I mean, not to say anything about the performances. I thought Jack Rayner, Leia Costa, May Kalamaui, and the girl who plays Katie, Natalie Grace. I thought they all did a really good job. I think even though the characters are pretty unlikable in this movie, I think the performances were really great, and they sold those horror moments, the moments of despair and just like reacting to all these things that are happening. I think they sold all that well. It's just I think the script kind of leaves a little bit much to be desired in terms of like getting me to really care about these characters outside of just them being the central focus of this movie. I was very much more interested in May Kalamaui's plot line than I was the central family story. So that was a little bit disappointing. But Natalie Grace does a really good job in her performance as the titular mummy. I think she did a really good job, and it's a very physical role. A lot of practical effects in this movie, which I really did enjoy. So those things that she had to work with, I bet were a lot of fun, and I think she sold them well. Again, I think it's just the movie doesn't really do enough to make me like to make me feel like I was like enjoying myself watching this movie. Where there were certainly those moments that was like, oh man, that's pretty crazy. But outside of that, it was just one that it was hard for me to care about at the end of the day, and that's just one of the things I felt that Evil Dead Rise did well, and this one just left me wanting a little bit more on that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all the things you said. My biggest thing was that this just didn't feel like a mummy movie. That's just the question I kept popping in my head. I'm like, how is this the mummy? And given, like, I wasn't trying to compare it to the 96 version, because that's one of those things, you strike gold, it's very hard to capture that magic again. I mean, the Mummy and the Mummy Returns are great, but for this one, I do appreciate they did try to go back to the little bit more old school one and focus on the actual mummy itself. And the cast, I think the characters, they were likable enough, but it's still, because it's like related to a family and stuff, I feel like they just didn't write them well enough to like you said, to just get emotionally invested in them completely. I think Jack Rayner was the one I could kind of empathize with the most, just because the way the story played out, and he had the most to work with on the whole thing. I did like I think May Kalamaui's Kalamaui, yeah, her character and her storyline, that was good because it had an intriguing aspect to it, like almost like a murder mystery thriller kind of thing. And yeah, the girl who played the mummy was great. I loved the practical effects. I think that's something that the industry is crying for, especially in horror, and horror is really doing great with that. But long story short, this just felt too much like Evil Dead, and it just doesn't match well with something that's kind of like classic Hollywood films. Like if this was like another Evil Dead movie, I think this would have been on point. Maybe a repeat of Evil Dead Rise, but it just wasn't working for me. And I did hear some of the people outside of the movie after like, yeah, it sucked and all this. I was like, I wouldn't go that far. I mean, it had some good elements to it. I like the liberties that Lee Cronin tried to play with, trying to increase the gore and the horror and the just like the body horror of it all. But some of it did come off like mean spirited. Where it was like, man, I thought I was supposed to like these people, but this kind of just makes me feel even worse for them. Like I pity them more than I actually like them. It's just not that's not the best feeling. You want to like feel horrible when something does happen, like because you like that character so much. So yeah, with all that being said, like I said, I agree with all the points that Burns said, and I basically kept thinking the same thing. I'm going to give this one a 2 out of 5, but it's not a bad 2 out of 5. I think it's definitely a solid horror movie, kind of getting yourselves ready for the horror movies coming out later this year and whatnot, but I just don't know if it's worth going to the theater for, because, theaters are expensive nowadays, so maybe a $5 Tuesday, I would say, is probably your best bet if you do want to catch this in theaters, or you may just want to wait for streaming, but yeah, it's okay. I think it's definitely better than the 2017 one, given it's vastly different. But yeah, it's just one of those ones I'm like, it kind of depends on who I'd recommend it to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this one feels more like one that you would recommend to people who are fans of like the possession subgenre of horror movies, like because yeah, it feels more like, again, like a standard possession movie than it does whatever you think of when you hear The Mummy, right? So that's, again, it's one of those things where it doesn't feel like it quite lives up to that title, but if it had probably had a different title, it would have been a little bit of an easier pill to swallow. But because you're going in with certain expectations, again, coming into it expecting a sort of like a mummy movie, like, again, this ancient evil, something that has to do with like the plagues and stuff, or something a little bit more Egyptian focused. Again, those elements are there, but it just feels like wallpaper for a movie that should have been called something else. So that's I think where a lot of the disappointment lies. And again, the script, I think, leaves a little bit to be desired when it comes to wanting to connect more with these characters. But if you're just coming in to look at some really cool horror sequences, certain scenes that are going to make you squirm in your scene and just be like, oh man, like freaked out about it, you can do a lot worse than this. This one definitely delivers on those points. Again, the practical effects are really good. I think it's pretty well shot too, and the performances across the board are pretty good, even though the characters themselves aren't really as deep as you want them to be. So it's certainly not a bad movie, but one that I felt like didn't quite reach those highs that I was kind of hoping for when, again, hearing who the director was and wanting some new fresh take on the Mummy premise. So for me, this one's going to be a 2 out of 5 also. Like you said, feels like a good appetizer for horror movies to come, but isn't going to be one of those that I feel like reaches the top of the horror list by the end of the year. But one that I had some enjoyment as I was watching it, even though it felt like I wanted a little bit more at the end of the day. But, that's just me. You might enjoy it a lot more than we did.
Yeah, like I always say, if you love this movie, or like some of these movies that we just don't care for too much, all power to you. That's great. You were able to see the silver lining in all of it that we just can't jive with. So, yeah, 2 out of 5 for both me and Byrne. Kind of recommend it depending on what you're in for or what you're wanting to do. Like if you just want something kind of neat to watch and got to get your horror appetite out of the way until some really good movies like Hokum and Werewolf and stuff come out this year. This may hold you over until at least next month. But yeah, for those of you who did happen to watch it, no spoilers, of course. Let us know what you think about in the comments. And as always, until next time, stay bodacious and keep on ranting for us.
Absolutely, everybody. Be good, be safe, and as always, we'll catch y'all on the next one.